G'day ladies and gents, and welcome to DCS World 2.5 with Mags, and welcome aboard the F-15 Eagle. So for today's video, we're going to take a little bit of a tour around the southern regions of Caucasus near the mountains, not far from Batumi, as this is a pretty good area to showcase the changes that DCS 2.5 has made. Now obviously we've got some buildings, we've got some cities in the region, we have the ocean and the coastline, rivers and into the mountains. And these were all areas that were really showing the previous version of this map's age. So I'm going to go quiet here for just a few seconds because takeoff is going to be a little bit loud. But I also want you to take a bit of a look at the map and have a little bit of a listen to how everything all sounds now in 2.5 as well. Note to self, remember to lock the bloody nose wheel steering before you try and take off. Now, there were some issues with the install of 2.5. I originally took my DCS 1.5.8 install and updated to 2.5, and I ran into a whole host of graphical issues with the new map. And I went through a whole bunch of options that were being posted by various people on the forums to try and correct it. Unfortunately, none of them seemed to solve the problem, so I ended up doing a full reinstall of DCS World 2.5 completely from scratch. Just a straight 2.5, no update from 1.5, using the commands for the DCS updater. And this fixed all the problems, and the client has been running perfectly fine since. So if you happen to be having any issues with the DCS client, this may be an option that you want to look into. Being as this is beta, sometimes stuff happens. What can you do? Now, as this flight was meant to be a test, I wanted to find out exactly how resource intensive the new 2.5 map was going to be. So you may notice the odd frame drop or the odd stutter within this video. This is because these are not the settings that I would normally fly DCS on. In fact, what I've actually done here is quite literally cranked every single graphical option that DCS has to offer up to the maximum level it can. The maximum draw distance, the maximum number of trees, the maximum texture quality, everything is turned up to 11. On top of that, I've also gone to my video card settings and I have manually turned on a whole host of extra features that the video card can enforce on DCS to try and push the graphics even further, just to see exactly what would happen. Now, as I said, there was the occasional drop in frame rate and the occasional micro stutter, but all things considered, and definitely in comparison to the previous map, considering that I have literally everything turned up to full, this ran pretty well. I don't think I'm going to have to tweak too many settings down in order to maintain a perfectly smooth frame rate while I'm actually flying in DCS. And this isn't just me on the map either. I have a massive selection of Blue Force units spawned in across the entirety of the map. So there is anti-aircraft emplacements, there's tanks, there's units on the ground, there are flights of aircraft, the F-18 you saw at the start of the video, there's a couple of flights of F-18s, a couple of flights of A-10s, some cargo transports flying around as well, all spawned in this region in order to try and make my system work. And for the result, the performance here is pretty bloody fantastic, especially for a first iteration of the publicly available 2.5 client. And so we begin to head up into the mountains. Now this is one area where the map was really showing its age. For those of you who watched my DCS World series, the MiG-29 campaign that I completed not all that long ago, well, most of that was done in the mountains, and they were not impressive to look at. You could really tell exactly how old this map was, both via the textures and the mesh for the terrain itself. The mountains were very clearly made out of polygons. You could see the edges of the mountains, and it really didn't look all that great. This, however, looks fantastic. So, dipping down into the valley, we've got tree-covered mountains on all sides, and there is a river and some small towns running through the centre of the valley, and once again, everything looks great. It's smooth. Despite everything that's going on down here visually, the effect on performance is actually minimal. So as we hit the end of the valley, I'm going to begin a climb out and start heading up into the higher peaks of the mountains, up above the snow line, and see how it looks up there. Once we've gone through that area, I'm actually going to reload this map, and we're going to load it with a heavy thunderstorm, and see how the weather interacts with the new lighting features, and see how it also performs. So FPS wise, flying at this altitude with this much going on visually in comparison to flying at altitude, on my end, on my system, I really only noticed a difference of about 5 or 6 frames. That was it, running on these graphics settings. The stable frame rate dropped by about that much. There were a couple of stutters and a couple of frame rate drops while I was going through the valley, but as I said before, really nothing that would affect me. If it wasn't for wanting to chase perfect smoothness when I fly, and of course when I record, I would probably leave these graphics settings as they are. So, heading up into the snow line, and my god, the mountains actually look like mountains up here now. The previous textures were this horrible shade of grey and looked awful. The snow was barely identifiable as snow. This looks more like what I would expect the top of a mountain to look like when I'm flying over it. Now, you can still see the mountaintops have some very clear edges to them, so the terrain mesh isn't ultra high detailed, but it's significantly better than it was previously. The mountains earlier on were probably of about the same quality, but having the trees over the top of them sort of smoothed them out and made them look right. That said, you can sort of only notice the straight edges on the mountains when you get very, very, very close to them. From a distance, they look perfectly fine. And yes, because I know somebody's going to pop this into the comment section down below, I am being nitpicky as fuck. It's what I do. Having said that, climbing around this big bastard, excluding looking at the very top of the mountain where you can definitely see the straight lines, looking at the sides of the mountain here, it looks much more rounded. So it may just be a closing problem on the peaks of the mountains that is a bit of an issue with the mesh. Either way, it's a minor thing. Alright, and back into the sky once again, and we are leaving the same airport as last time, but this time we have a massive thunderstorm rolling over the top of us. I've put in a 22 knot wind at 33 feet, and winds up around the 19 to 20 knots going further up. So we should have a bit of crossflow, it should interfere with the clouds a little bit, and we should be able to get a bit of a look at exactly how that's going to affect the water. Oh, and there will be lightning as well. Now the transition from clear skies to clouds is still fairly abrupt when entering the clouds from below, but is relatively smooth when exiting the clouds, so there may be a few things that need to be tweaked up on the weather. Hopefully 2.5 will allow for that. Now, it is quite dark at the moment, as I'm sure you've noticed, but believe it or not, we're actually flying out at exactly the same time of day, in exactly the same area that we did on the previous flight. The drop in ambient light is being generated by the storm cover, and the effect is quite dramatic, as you can see. It's actually quite beautiful. There is a couple of things I have noted, however. Flying over the tops of these towns, they are very dark. There is no lights, and that's because the lights for towns, street lights, cars, so on and so forth in DCS currently work on a timer. If it's before a certain time of day, the lights are off. Once you hit a certain time of day, all the lights come on. Same applies to the runways. I think it may be worth Eagle Dynamics considering putting in some kind of script or a line of code. I'm not entirely sure how you would do it. I'm not a programmer. But to have the client check for the ambient light level within an environment. So here you can see it's actually quite dark, and even though it's early enough in the day that the lights wouldn't normally be activated, because it is dark, activate those lighting assets that would normally be activated at night time early. This would of course include all the street lights and the lights around towns, the car headlights, and the runway lighting and the lighting around the airfields. I did notice flying around in a stream earlier on today that the runways are incredibly dark and hard to see in these lighting conditions. So at this point we're climbing higher and higher, increasing elevation as we climb up into the mountains, and as you can see we are getting very close to the cloud base at this point. And as we get closer to that cloud base, the ambient light in the area is dropping by a noticeable margin. It's much darker here than it was down on near the coastline, for example. So yeah, this is an area where I think actually having the ambient lighting turn on for the towns and the cities, the nighttime lighting turn on early, would look, well, quite honestly, fantastic at this point. Okay, and once again it's time to breach the clouds and get up above them. And once again you can see here it's an almost instantaneous switch from clear skies to white. Maybe a little bit more smoothness in that transition, although it does look good coming out the top of the clouds. And as you can see, I wasn't kidding, we are flying under exactly the same daylight conditions as we were in the previous flight. It's just that storm below us having a massive effect on the lighting down below. Now we're up above, however, you can see nice and clear, and we can see the mountaintops breaking out through the tops of the cloud. Now, my personal opinion, this looks absolutely fantastic, but there is a couple of nitpicks that I have in here as well. As we get very close to where the clouds meet the side of the mountains, if you look, you can actually see the layers. They appear as almost white lines running horizontally up the side of the mountain, where the blending to create the cloud effects is actually occurring. Now, if it was possible to just smooth out that effect a little bit so that the lines weren't quite so defined, so it was just smooth fluffy cloud leading up to the mountain and then a mountain sticking out of the clouds, I think that would be all that would need to be done with the above cloud level effects. It's the only noticeable thing that I found. Otherwise, once you ignore the fact that you can see these horizontal lines that make up the cloud cover around the edges of the mountains sticking out through the cloud cover just looks amazing. It's just a sea or an ocean of white, with the mountaintops forming a island just sticking out of this ocean. It looks absolutely amazing. So, as we begin looking for a spot to descend through the clouds and get back into that storm, does the new Caucasus map stand up to the current maps, Normandy, NTTR, and the Hormuz map that will be released soon, or at least what we've seen of it? In my opinion, it's not quite as good, but it was never really meant to be. These maps were designed so that they were one-to-one recreations of a location. For example, if you have the DCS Combined Arms module, you can take control of a tank on the ground, and you can use a real-world map of NTTR to navigate the roads around NTTR, and everything is exactly where it's meant to be. It doesn't seem to be the case here, but considering the original map that they are updating from was never like that to begin with, this is hardly a problem. As a map itself, it is fantastic to look at, and it's going to be excellent to actually fly missions over the top of. It's actually what I've been waiting for. I've been holding back playing through a lot of the DCS campaigns on the channel because I've been waiting for this map, and I'm really looking forward to actually flying out in it. In fact, I think that's exactly what I'm going to do now. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching. I hope all of you managed to get your updates to DCS 2.5. As I understand it, DCS 2.5 is now available on Steam as well. You just need to opt into the beta for it. Until next time, remember to click that like button, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, take care.